the agents of darkness have to use what they have access to. So they're inspiring us to build these machines that their technology, they're physical, they just work within nature. It's not exactly magic, but in this kind of world, it's the closest that they can get, and they can still use them for some of their own purposes, apparently. And now what's really weird to think about, we got all this technology when the restrainer is removed, if that whole theory is correct, and if all this magic stuff comes back, what is the world going to look like when we have a convergence of occult magic that all of a sudden is working really well now, and this crazy technology that we're developing today.
Hey, welcome back to Blurry Creatures. Thanks for tuning into this podcast. If you're out there looking for a typical cryptid show, you found the wrong place. On Blurry Creatures, we try to talk about ancient creatures through the biblical context, and we think that's the best book ever written. And I get it. I get a lot of people out there have their spiritual hang-ups. You had a bad experience at the church, or you don't understand the Bible, and I was there. To be honest, it was hard for me to conceptualize some of the harder parts of the Bible and how it all relates. But we talk about creatures through that aspect, that lens. We try to give you better answers on Blurry Creatures. And if you've been here since the beginning, or you've been on the binge with us, a lot of people are emailing us and saying, hey, I just got through all the episodes. I've been binging for 3 weeks. Welcome to the weirdness. And if you want to partner with us and help us make more content, because that's the goal, is to tell the truth and to tell it as well as possible with as many different guests as possible, which requires pretty much all my time. So if you want to help me and Luke make this show the best show out there in this space, go to blurrycreatures.com/members, become a member of the show, support us, and we can devote endless time to making this show and helping you understand this world and what's coming, what's been happening, and just figure out what's going on out there. We're going to bring on author and just generally all-around smart guy Josh Peck to talk about CERN and some of the other topics that come up on our show all the time. So enjoy.
The history of our Earth is so different from what we can imagine.
The Smithsonian, and if they found out about a large skeleton somewhere, was to go get it.
I'm going to assume at least one person is right, because if one person's right, it busts the paradigm.
It all goes back to the fallen cherub. And the problem with the modern day church, they have a very truncated view of the supernatural.
This backdrop that's just pregnant with all kinds of meaning associated with this Mount Hermon event.
Welcome to Blurry Creatures.
And this guy defects from the kingdom. That's a big deal.
Welcome to the show, Josh Peck. You're an author, biblical researcher, videographer at Skywatch TV. You've created many shows yourself, and you've written a lot of books, including Abaddon Ascending with Tom Horn. Also, you've talked about quantum physics, and we talk about that a lot on our show, trying to understand how these creatures kind of go to and from. And that's a very Bigfoot thing, Luke. We talk about that a lot, about how Bigfoot can do that, and people describe that. So welcome to the show, and that is what we ask everybody at the top of the hour. Josh, what are your thoughts on Bigfoot? What do you think about that creature? Thanks for coming on Blurry Creatures. What do you think?
All right, so here's my thought. If this creature exists, and that's an if it exists, I kind of lean in believing that it does. I think it's probably a Gigantopithecus that happened to survive. But think about it this way: in light of the whole Genesis, flood, demon, Nephilim, all that stuff, in light of that, what if this is just a regular animal it's really smart, but it's not human. It's a little smarter than normal monkeys that we're aware of. If you were a demon trying to find a body to inhabit, and humans are difficult because,
right,
they can be cast out of humans. and they have their own souls anyway. But of the whole animal kingdom, if Bigfoot exists, and if you could inhabit animals, we know demons can. They went into the pigs and in the Gospels and all that. But what would they pick? Maybe they would pick Bigfoot, to inhabit. You do that over centuries, maybe. Maybe they can do things now that they hadn't been able to do. But if they're demonized, that might be. So, and I don't think they all are, but that might be why some of them are really violent and some of them seem docile and curious. So just a couple of thoughts, but I'm still on the fence. I don't really know.
I like that, Josh. It's like you could try to inhabit a human, like you drive a Prius, or you can get in a Ford F-650, like Bigfoot.
Yeah,
you're breaking trees and turn them upside down, right? I mean,
and think about it. They're if it's a real animal, they're naturally elusive. I mean, they have everything that a demon who's afraid of Christians that can cast them out. They got everything that they would want. So
here's a question for you. If a demon gets into you, does that give you extra dimensional abilities just being inhabited by a spirit?
I have no idea. I've only heard like anecdotal stuff. So I have a couple of people that are in deliverance ministries, and I've heard stories where it seems like they can teleport and do all this weird stuff. But I honestly have no idea.
It's probably better that way, Josh.
Yeah. Well, hey, we talk about dimensions all the time on our show, and it's a lot of conjecture, and we don't really know the details, but a lot of people say they see these creatures and then they just slip right through some sort of portal. And what we brought you on the show today is talk about CERN. A lot of people asked us about that, and you wrote a book about it. And I know that you mentioned that you haven't been digging into it lately, and supposedly they've been firing this thing up lately. But we haven't talked about it at all on our show. So talk to us like we don't know anything about CERN,
because we don't.
We don't.
I mean, other than what they tell you.
Yeah.
In platitudes on the AP and Reuters, right? Like, it's just this hydrogen, or it's just a particle collider, and they're just trying to figure out the fabric of the universe. You're like, sure you are.
It's like the Office episode. Talk to me like I'm 5. That's kind of what we don't know anything. But people always want us to talk about it.
That actually works out perfect because I haven't been keeping up with as much of the current events having to do with CERN. I've actually been into Dead Sea Scroll stuff lately. But actual just how the machine works is pretty mind blowing, and it actually does show that our physical reality is a lot weirder than we think. Just so people know where I'm coming from, I'm a Christian, obviously. I lean towards young Earth, I guess, and. But I don't, again, that's another one of those I don't really know. But, in science, they're always going to say the 15 billion year thing. Maybe not. I don't think it necessarily has to be that long, but let's just go with their numbers if we have to talk about it. But so the way that CERN is the organizing body, the people in charge of what's called the Large Hadron Collider, which is basically a big particle accelerator, and it crashes particles together, and then they examine the explosion and they try to see if there are any new particles in that explosion. Now you might wonder, how could firing 2 protons together, which is one kind of particle, how could that create something like a Higgs boson, which is a totally different kind of particle? That would be like crashing 2 cars into each other and somehow getting a baby rhinoceros out of it. It's just 2 totally different things. Well, it's because what we think of as particles is actually not, it's not exactly real. We think of particles as these little bits of matter. Like they're small, but they're still like solid because they make up reality, so they would have to be, but that's actually not what particles are at all. Particles are really just an energy fluctuation in what's called quantum fields. A field is what produces a particle or this energy spike. You could think of a field as it's everywhere all the time, kind of like temperature. The temperature in the room, it fluctuates depending where you are in the room, but it's always around. You can always measure it. It's a property that exists all over. Well, everything is like that. Gravity, mass, light, everything is like that in the universe. And that's what reality is. So just like if you can have like a heat spike in one part of the room, that can happen in these quantum fields. And when that spike happens, when that energy spike happens, that is the particle, that energy spike. So it's not really a little piece of matter at all. It's actually just like a localized burst of energy. Now, what's strange talking about extra dimensions is there's no known source for the energy that's creating all these particles all the time throughout the universe. And the only thing that I've ever heard any secular scientists really comment on it is they'll go as far as to say, we don't know what it is, but it's got to be something extra dimensional. And then they won't take it any further than that, because obviously that gets into the whole God question and everything. And usually scientists like to avoid that. So the reason that the Large Hadron Collider works the way it does is because our reality is actually made up of all these fields, like dozens of fields. I think there's something like 52 discoverable ones, or ones that have been discovered already. When you fire two protons together, or any two particles, well, except photons because they don't interact, but if you have like two protons smashed together, all that energy vibrates the other surrounding fields. And so the hope is, by adding energy to these other fields, they can cause that field to vibrate, and they can cause an energy spike, a particle, and maybe discover a new particle. That's how they actually discover new fields. So in 2012, the discovery of the God particle, it's really just a Higgs boson. It doesn't, I mean, God created all the particles, so in that sense, it has something to do with them. But besides that, it was just a marketing thing why they called it that. But in 2012, the discovery of the Higgs boson was such big news because it showed that there's this thing called a Higgs field. So the particle is just evidence that the Higgs field exists. The Higgs field is what really the big discovery was. The Higgs field is what mass is. So the more you interact with this Higgs field that is all around us, the more you move through it, that interaction is mass, which is really weird and trippy to think about, because it means it's not really like mass isn't so much of a substance as it is like an interaction. But it explains why things happen in the universe the way they do, why photons travel at the speed that they do, and why they have no mass. How can something exist that has no mass? It's because mass isn't substance, it's an interaction. Photons just don't interact with the Higgs field at all. You know, without any interaction with the Higgs field, that's why they're able to travel as fast as they can. That's also why that's the cosmic speed limit. The speed of light is as fast as anything can go. That's no interaction with the Higgs field. So that's why that was such a big deal. I don't know where you want to take it. I could just keep rattling off information, but maybe I should pause and see if you guys got any questions.
Well, no, I mean, it makes me think, Luke, this is how maybe a creature could walk through walls. Mass doesn't actually exist to them. Or the way that it interacts with their body, it's like almost as if they have some sort of key unlocked and they can just go right through the door that we couldn't.
Yeah. It kind of makes me think of angels like in the Bible. Yeah. And I mean, even Jesus in his glorified body was able to be in a closed room without going through the door somehow. And I think that actually does have something to do with extra dimensions. I mean, we know that there are, two different kinds of flesh, like the Bible says. There's celestial flesh and there's natural flesh. And, so it's not that angels are made of the same stuff as we are. Like we definitely, the way that I see physical reality, it's kind of a subset of something larger, but it's also cut off. Like we're almost in quarantine, and I think that's because of sin. but so, I mean, it would be like
the word that should not be uttered. Quarantine.
Yeah, exactly. So if an angel, for example, if it was an extra dimensional entity, let's say it just had one more spatial dimension than we do, and I can get into what all that means, but that would mean that they would be able to bypass certain things that we're bound to in our physical reality. The best way to understand this, because it's impossible to understand, but the best way to at least kind of get a grasp on it is to think about one dimension lower than ours. So not counting time, let's set time aside for a minute, but let's just count space. We live in 3 dimensions. What would a universe look like if it was only 2-dimensional, completely flat? Actually, physicists use this thought exercise a lot. They call it a flatland. But what if there was a 2-dimensional universe that was totally flat? They had no up or down, no concept of it, no ability to move up or down. And the inhabitants of this universe are called flatlanders. This universe doesn't even have to be that big. It can just be, right in front of you, like a 1x1 square or something. Now, what happens if you have these guys like floating in front of you? But what happens if you put your finger in flatland? They're not going to see your whole finger. They're going to see a 2-dimensional cross section, the part that is invading their space. So they'll actually see a circle. Now, if I put 2 fingers in flatland, right here, they're going to see 2 circles, and I can move those independently. And the flatlanders would assume that these are 2 different objects, but they're actually the same. Now, what's really weird is in particle physics, there's this quality that some particles have, electrons, for example. where they can essentially split, and it's the same electron. These aren't two different electrons. Same electron can split and then go back. So it makes me wonder if there's something extra dimensional going on about particles. I mean, there was even a older idea. I think Richard Feynman came up with this, but where he thought that every electron was all the same electron. It's just able to move in and out of time in a way that we can't. So if it goes forward and backward in time, we would see two electrons, but it's actually the same electron. So his idea was all photons are the same photon, all electrons are the same electron, and they've just been bouncing back and forth through time, for however long. But so that's already a trippy thought. But if that were true, it would explain why every electron has the same exact value. Every photon has the same exact value. Maybe it is the same. I mean, it's a trippy thought, but who knows?
Isn't there's also a particle, right, that can essentially disappear and then reappear in a different space, in a different place, like in this orbital rotation, right? Which people will talk about that being
time travel,
akin to that, or akin to the idea of being able to, I don't know, like Star Trek, beam to a different spot, essentially.
Yeah, it's called quantum tunneling, and it's a weird thing, but it's the only reason the sun even shines the way that it does. Without quantum tunneling, it wouldn't even work. But it's exactly what you said. So while a particle isn't a solid piece of matter, it's an energy spike, but it's also a probability. So that energy spike, when we try to measure it, we can either tell how fast it's going or the location, but for some reason can't tell both. So even when you try to pinpoint the location, though, it's fuzzy. There's a probability. Maybe it'll be here, maybe it'll be here, maybe it'll be here. Now, what's really weird, though, is when you have that electron, let's say, okay, it's here. Where's it going next? Maybe here, maybe here, maybe here, maybe here. And there's like thousands of different, probabilities, probably billions. Well, let's say that there's a barrier right here that the electron cannot pass because the barrier is a higher mass than the electron is. Impossible for the electron to pass it. There's no way to get through it. Well, sometimes it does. It quantum tunnels because the probability that it might be over here, while the probability is lower, it's still probable. And sometimes it does show up there, which, I mean, it's called quantum tunneling, but it shouldn't be able to go through that barrier, but it pops out of existence and pops on the other side. So it's really, really weird to think about, but that kind of stuff happens naturally in the quantum realm. So it seems like there would be a way to have something like that, on the more macro scale, and that would be like teleportation or something like that. But yeah, really weird stuff.
Is that the same as like a wormhole, or those different ideas? The idea, so because those are dimensional, or is that? Yeah.
So wormholes are folding space, and the only way that wormholes work, and the only way space can fold, which we know that it does, space absolutely folds. That's the way that gravity works. Right. But the only way that it can fold and bend is if there's an extra dimension for it to bend into. Like, say, if I have, this piece of cardboard, if there is no third dimension, I can't bend it, because if I bend it, it's bending into, the third dimension. If there's no third dimension, it can't be bent. It'll stay flat forever. Well, we know that the space bends and curves, and even time does that, which this is a trippy thought. Maybe there's extra dimensions of time, so we know that. So a wormhole is the idea that you can manipulate kind of what's already happening, and in a sense fold the space between two points that has a large distance apart. You fold the space, and kind of, if you want to go from here to here, you just fold it and you're able to go there. I don't know how possible that is because I mean it would take more energy than what stars are doing. Stars themselves aren't going to that level. I mean, maybe black holes do, but even that we don't know for sure. And there's, as far as we know, there's no way to travel through one and survive it. Here's something trippy. And if you want, I can get into this, but actually you would never reach the end of the black hole. The universe would end before you would reach it, and you would live to see it, because for you, it would only be maybe a few hours, which is really trippy.
Man, this just reminds me of, we've heard some weird things on our show, Josh. Brought on Fritz Zimmerman. He talked about how these fairies, he thinks that the disappearances going on in state national parks, he says sometimes they even could come out 100 years later, like they were gone 5 minutes. And then they come out of these places, and there's, 100 years go by. And then people have sailed through. Some people suggest that some of these pyramids and ancient places, you could go through portals. I mean, we get into all the weird stuff on our show, so we're giving you license to get as weird as possible. We're not scientists, so we don't really know how to discuss that stuff for very long. But there's some satanic rituals going around this. Are they opening portals? Is this all related to some of the people to come on show talk about end times and what they're really trying to do? They tell us, oh yeah, it's this science experiment, but really it feels like some sort of satanic experiment, and that's kind of why everyone on our show is like, hey, you got to talk about this.
Well,
so
yeah, they're trying to open the abyss. Essentially, is what people they hypothesize in this. And can I ask a couple really dumb questions about CERN?
Oh yeah, totally.
Okay, so we talk. I mean, atomic theory, right, is a theory. We can't see a lot of the electron microscope. Maybe we can see some really small things, but when we're talking about these colliding these particles, like you're saying, you're seeing energy spikes. You're not really even seeing particles, correct? Like we can't see that small.
Well, you can see I could say you can measure it, but yeah, you can't look at it and see it with your eyes. Yeah.
That just I don't me trying to comprehend what they're actually doing. It makes more sense to think they're not actually looking and saying, hey, there's the God particle, right? There's a little one right there. They're actually they're measuring bursts of energy, and then each particle theoretically has its own subset of energy, right? So that when it's different, and that's something different.
Yeah, it has every particle has different properties, interacts with different things, so they're able to measure all of those things.
So what about, back to what Nate was saying, what about doing this in the quantum idea, do you think has to do with, or potentially could have to do with, opening a dimension or opening different dimensions?
So they're actually trying to do this now, and they have been for years, and they've been on the record with it. Their science director, I believe his name was Sergio Bertolucci, went on record saying that they were looking for extra dimensions. They wanted to probe them, map them, explore them, and try to communicate with anything that might be on the other side. And there's a couple different ideas on how to actually do this. So at CERN, what they're hoping is that they can have access to these other dimensions. Maybe there's, for example, gravity. Gravity is one of the weaker of the forces, the weakest force, and there's a big question, why is it so weak? Well, there's now evidence suggesting that our gravity might be spilling into another dimension, because gravity, specifically the graviton particle, has this unique ability to be able to not be hinged to our 3 dimensions. It can actually escape into other dimensions. Now, they haven't been able to actually find a graviton, like they haven't seen one or measured one, but there's a gravity field, so there has to be a gravity particle. So, but the idea is if they can discover the graviton and learn how to manipulate it, they can send a message into another dimension by sending a line of particles and changing the spin or changing some quality, one or the other, so it makes a binary message, zeros and ones basically, and send a string of that to another dimension. So that's kind of the technical idea and how they want to do this, or at least one idea on how they might, but that's just for communication. They actually want to travel there. Now, getting into the prophetic stuff, and I wrote about this in Abaddon Ascending, but we know in Revelation 9, at some point, this thing called the abyss is going to be opened up. Now, specifically in Revelation, an angel does that, but in the book, I kind of put forth the idea: what if CERN did have something to do with it? Don't know if it does, but what if it did? And what if these, the human beings are trying to communicate with extra dimensional entities, which the only thing they're going to get, that's fallen angels. Right. That's the only thing they're going to get. The good guys aren't gonna mess around with that. Only the bad guys will. Well, what if God finally says, okay, you're not seeking me, you're seeking these things. I'm going to do the same thing I did at the Tower of Babel. You want these things, you can have them. And then opens the abyss. In the Tower of Babel, it was, you're worshiping all these false gods. You want them, fine. And you scattered them all around. And that's why we have all these different religions. So the idea might be kind of the same. You're trying to communicate with these things. Fine, I'll let you have what you want. You're not going to like it. Angel, go open that abyss. Then the abyss opens, possibly through the CERN experiment or whatever. And what comes through are these horrible locust creatures that torment people on Earth for 5 months. So that could be an example of, something extra dimensional being opened up and introduced into our world. So there could be prophetic significance with CERN and what they're doing at the LHC. But even they have gone on record saying that they want to do that. They want to explore, map extra dimensions and communicate with anything that might be over there.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of I've had 5 or 6 people send us the mock sacrifice that guy filmed in the middle of the night. Have you seen that, Luke?
No.
I'm sure you've seen it, Josh. There's
Yeah.
this guy. He's like in the window of this building right now, and they're out in the courtyard between in the buildings. They literally have these figures in robes, and then they have this little girl comes out, and they do like a mock sacrifice right there.
Yeah.
And this guy, supposedly the guy that films this, ends up dead. So there's
weird.
Yeah, there's some really weird stuff surrounding this. So I mean, it feels like, on the surface there's this scientific narrative, but below is exactly what I think you're describing.
Yeah, so we wrote about that in Abaddon Ascending. Tom mainly wrote that part, but the conclusion that we drew from it is either it's some kids playing pranks, whatever, or
didn't look like that to me.
I know. We kind of fall in it looks like a what's called a parody. So in like Aleister Crowley and like all this magic stuff, a parody can be just as powerful as the real thing if done in the right way or something.
Yeah.
And I think something like how many people see it has something to do with it, adds to the power. I don't know. So maybe that's why it went viral. But the weird thing about that is I do believe that there's 99% of the people at CERN, I think, are just scientists who are just wanting to learn about the universe. But I do think that there's this 1% shadowy, who knows what, that's kind of
sounds like the Masons, right?
It does, yeah.
That's kind of controlling what happens, or trying to at least steer it in a certain way. I couldn't really get a whole ton of information on that because obviously it's a little easier when it's something big like a country, then it's a little easier to kind of find secret societies and stuff. But when it's something small like a CERN organization, it's a little tougher. I mean, actually everybody involved with CERN is huge. It's all over the globe, but the actual organization itself is pretty small. So it's tough, but it was just a weird thing to hear their science director talk like that, knowing that, like, I've watched a bunch of physics lectures, and after a while you sort of just get how scientists talk, and most scientists would never say something. They wouldn't put it in that terms, in those terms, they would try to be a little bit more technical about it or more real sounding about it, I guess. But the way that Sergio Bertolucci said it, I mean, it was almost spiritualized. It's almost like we're going to try to communicate with things, or we want to go into this other world and explore it. It's just it's weird. It's weird terminology. It's a weird way for a scientist to explain it. So it could have been all the marketing thing, or maybe some of these people were showing their hand a little bit. I don't know.
Interesting. So if you're out in the park LARPing, Luke, watch out.
Well, I do that a lot, actually. we use styrofoam swords, though, so it's really pretty safe.
You could go through some portal.
If I walk through something, we'll just have to cancel the show. It's not a big deal. Or I'll let you trudge on, soldier on without me. Suddenly
you find yourself 800 years ago in Scotland fighting for your freedom.
Right, and I'd be like, man, I brought the wrong weapon to this fight. No, Josh had a couple questions too about some of because we know Nate and I talked about the occult, and a lot of what the occult does, whether it be the Masons we just mentioned or Crowley or whoever, right? Even in the mystery religion stuff, the symbolism is huge for them, right? And so I know there's a lot of like beast destroyer symbolism that comes with CERN, and then there's also some relation to what you talk about in the book, the horned god. Can you talk through a little bit of that, because I think that in of itself, like you kind of just touched on, the president or whoever leads this thing really using like platitudinal spiritual, language.
Oh yeah.
But like they actually are like putting it. It almost seems overt in some ways, and
it is
in what they're doing, and it falls right in line, right? It falls right in line. Nate and I had an episode we talked about Astro World and Travis Scott and all the weird stuff, all the imagery that was just right there and right in your face, and tell you it's not what it is, but it really is what it is. And what can you talk a little bit about that with CERN? Because I know I see that stuff on social media, and you're like, oh yeah, there's 3 6s in this CERN logo.
Well, that is actually just the synchrotron. That's just the design of the thing. But I will say though, the imagery thing is real. There's a huge statue of Shiva doing this cosmic dance to destroy the universe. This big statue is right outside of of CERN, of the lab. So, I mean, there is this imagery. It was given as a gift, but in the story, Shiva destroys the universe and creates a new one. So if you think about that, if all these false gods are just fallen angels, this is some fallen angel trying to take credit for what God is going to do after the millennium in creation of new heavens and new earth. But this fallen angel apparently is trying to bring that in now. Now, what's weird is there is a scenario called the Higgs field doomsday. And the idea is with the Higgs field, because it is different than every other field. So every other field, when nothing is happening, it sits at 0. nothing's happening, no energy, zero. The Higgs field is different. There's no part of it that's at zero. So the idea is, because the Higgs field is on this razor thin edge of an energy scale, where if it was a little bit too little, everything falls apart. A little bit too much, everything becomes a black hole. It's on this like thin razor edge. So the idea is that somewhere in the universe, at some point, a fluctuation could happen, a fluctuation in the Higgs field that's a little too high. And all of a sudden, that the Higgs field would go into a higher energy scale. And so this bubble would start, it would expand at the speed of light. And inside the bubble, the Higgs field is even more intense. It's stronger. So gravity, in a sense, would be stronger. Mass is stronger. Everything turns into black holes, and that expands over the universe. And the whole universe basically is destroyed, and it's a true vacuum. There is literally nothing. Well, I've heard physicists talk about that. And so I've wondered, now I don't think that that's actually going to happen, but what if like a small scale version of that, or something similar where CERN is literally creating these energy spikes? Now at the moment, unless they've made some advancements in the past couple of years that I'm not aware of, but at the moment, I believe that the LHC is not any stronger than cosmic waves coming into our atmosphere. So that happens all the time, and that's not really doing anything. If it's that, then that's the Higgs field thing probably isn't going to happen, at least here. Could happen anywhere. But if they advance the energy output, which they're doing, they're building other particle colliders around the world. I think there's one going up in China and Japan, and which is supposed to be bigger. Could something be powerful enough to create something like the Higgs field doomsday scenario? And I don't know, but at the same time, I'm not confident that all the physicists know either, because it's never really been done before.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like it's sort of opening Pandora's box, literally, and you don't. Yeah. And you wonder, how safe is this? I mean, some of these guys in these buildings are just doing this, and they're not even thinking about what if they succeed? What if something does open up? It just seems like a very crazy gamble, in my opinion. And some of I know we could talk about CERN for a long time, but I think one of the things we talk about a lot on our show, and I think it might relate, is, and I've read some things you've written, and sort of how we talk a lot on our show of how these entities, these angels, kind of came into our dimension, our space, and were able to mate with women and create this offspring of the giants, which spawned all kinds of weird creatures, which is kind of where our show lives. And I think there's some sort of quantum discussion there that I would love to have, because it's hard to people just, especially modern day Christians, when you try to explain to them this Genesis 6 scenario. And we had Tim Alberino on, and he really broke it down, and it was great, and he really puts it in layman's terms. But the quantum part of it is just fascinating to me, and I think we're there, Luke. I think that's kind of where we're at. I'd love to kind of dive into that a little bit of like some different thoughts you have about specifically these two kind of colliding. Hey, look at that.
Yeah,
look at
that there. So I believe that angels are probably extra dimensional beings, but in Jude it says that when the angels fell, they left their first habitation and estate. And when you look into the Greek in that, if I got those words right, when you look into the Greek in that, what it really boils down to is not only did they leave their home, their heavenly home, but they also left their bodies, their temples, their tents. The Bible has a bunch of words for it, but they left their bodies. And I think that's their extra dimensionality. So I think they became three-dimensional beings, but that doesn't mean that they were human. They didn't become human. They just became three-dimensional beings. So they were still, in a sense, angels, and still had abilities that we wouldn't have, but they needed a body to be able to operate in our world, and apparently that's something they can do. I mean, think about the whole Flatland scenario again. If I wanted to actually go into Flatland and communicate with Flatland beings, and I can't really do that as a three-dimensional being. I might be able to like shout at them, and they can hear me, kind of like how sometimes God has talked to prophets and stuff before. I can do that, but to be in bodily form, I would need access to a two-dimensional body, which either my current body would either have to have the ability to do that, or I would have to have the ability to transfer my spirit into some other vessel in another dimension, and we don't have anything close to that ability. So it's not that the angels like became humans or anything, but apparently extra dimensional beings have that ability. But getting back, I think once they make that trip, it's done. Once they make that trip, it's done. they make that trip, it's done. Once they make that trip, it's because like we can't really go there. I mean, not without great difficulty, you know. And even if we could go to, like, say, the fourth spatial dimension, we wouldn't be able to process it. Everything would look so weird. We would process it with a three-dimensional understanding in our brain. All we would see a bunch of just shapes, like changing shapes. And
do you think that's why the prophets described their visions being in heaven with these creatures that look like that and weird shapes and eyes and stuff like that?
Possibly. I mean, I think that there's spiritual significance to all that too. But yeah, I mean, I do think that he literally saw those. I think that at least to him, the angels literally looked like that. But that's a good question, because think about this. In Ezekiel, the angels come to him. They're all connected and they're all kind of like this one thing with many heads. And it says like their legs come down into one hoof and their wings are joined together. Now we see the same exact creatures in Revelation, but this time the angels aren't coming to the prophet. They're not coming to John like they did with Ezekiel. This time John is caught up and he's able to go up and see them. Well, now they're all separate. So, you know, they're not all melded together. They still look weird, but they're not, you know, they're not like melded together. There's actually a term called extra-dimensional unfolding. And the way it works, to try to make it real simple, think about a cube. Now, if I wanted to show a flatlander a cube, if I put the cube in flatland, they're only going to see a square. Well, what if I wanted to give the flatlanders the most amount of information about this cube as possible? I could unfold it and make it into a two-dimensional thing, and then they could look at it and they could see that it's, you know, actually it would look like a cross. But what if I wanted to go another dimension? Let's say I had a 4-dimensional cube, which is called a tesseract. If you unfold that into our dimension, it looks like it's a cross made out of cubes with 2 extra arms. Now, what if I wanted to take that object? Well, actually, that's called the tesseract. The hypercube is the 4-dimensional cube. But what if I wanted to take that tesseract? What if I wanted to show that to flatlanders? Well, I still could unfold it, but now some of those panels are going to overlap other panels. And the flatlanders are going to start to see some of these pieces meld together because it's just too complicated to fully represent in a 2-dimensional surface like that. I think that's probably what was going on with Ezekiel. I think that's why those angels appeared like that. Mm-hmm. I think that there were at least 2 spatial dimensions removed from Ezekiel, because I think that's how much it takes at least before you get that merging effect. But that explains why when John went to heaven and saw the angels there, they weren't disconnected. He was actually able to see them in their own habitat. Now he still has a 3-dimensional perspective because he wasn't dead, he wasn't glorified, you know, he was out of the body, so you can see things a little clearer, but his mind is still processing it in a 3-dimensional capacity. So he's still able to explain to us what he's seeing. If it wasn't, like, if God did not limit his perception to 3 dimensions and he actually saw 4th dimensional, there would be no way he'd be able to really explain it to us. We wouldn't understand. So yeah,
it's complicated.
It makes my head hurt though. You're like, dude, how do you're unfolding and unfolding and unfolding. You think like,
well, it reminds me of Tim Mackey was talking about. We just had Tim Mackey from the Bible Project on. He was talking about how Isaiah and Ezekiel had different sort of visions and what they saw in heaven. And I wondered if it was related to kind of what you were saying. It's kind of like a crumpled up piece of paper with a drawing on it. You're going to see everything's just not fully, but when you flatten it out, then, oh, he drew.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
You just see this jumbled mess, but if you speak that language, you can see through all of those things, and it's a clear message and a clear creature to you, but it's not.
Yeah.
So who knows? It's hard to know where to go from here, but you were saying sort of, and we talked about this with the ancient giants, that when they come into sort of our realm, they don't leave their heavenly estate, but you know, because obviously the abyss is going to open. These are the angels that sinned, but they sort of did leave something in heaven to come into our realm to mate with women, to create the chaos that happened in the Genesis 6 story.
Yeah, they left something. And I think the way that God has this set up is I think it's really easy for them to visit here. I mean, even good angels will do that. I mean, if God has a message that he wants to send somebody, he'll send an angel, and an angel can visit here. But I think to actually inhabit it and to actually be a three-dimensional creature, like in this world, like to be in this world like that, I think they have to leave something behind. And I don't know exactly what that is or how that works. But again, like it would be a lot easier for me, not as a flatlander, but just as a three-dimensional being, to enter flatland. I don't even need a portal. I can just put my finger in it. I assume it's that easy for them to get here too.
Like, how about when the angels walk into Sodom? People know they're not human. Like, I mean, they know they're different, right? They look different, and yet they look like us. And so but those are the good guys somehow coming here and inhabiting this dimension or realm in a way that we recognize as like us, but not us. And yet, I mean, that's a different situation than the ones that fell and then left whatever it was, and they left their habitation behind, because we would assume these ones return because they're doing God's bidding, right? That part makes my brain hurt thinking about how
it's kind of like they walked off the field of the dreams and they can't go back on it now, right? Like so you're asking if the Watchers could go back? Is that kind of what you're asking, Luke?
Not just kind of how that happens. Like, maybe my bigger question is like is the interaction of what the ancients thought were realms, right? And there's all these things we don't see, according to Paul, that happen around us, whether it be in the spiritual realm and all that stuff. And maybe connecting these two thoughts, what I need help with is connecting the spiritual realm thought that like there are these things we can't see that are interacting that are around us.
Oh, okay, yeah.
With the dimension idea that somehow these things are separate but interact. And then also I would assume that, like, maybe what I'm trying to say is that I would assume there are rules that govern this. And so, because God is the God of the universe who sets these things into motion, but the idea that, like, the Watchers came and then they couldn't go back, and yet,
I think basically it's the difference between putting a finger in flatland and then chopping your finger off and leaving it in flatland,
and they can walk around.
So, So like if God designed, like, okay, if there was a two-dimensional universe with two-dimensional beings that God wanted us to communicate with at some point, he would give us the ability to do that. So let's say, I mean, this is ridiculous, but let's say just hypothetically that we have a two-dimensional cross-section of our finger that we can actually talk out of and communicate in a two-dimensional way. We can experiment or experience the two-dimensional world. We can see things through it. Let's say we had a part of our body that's like that. So we could just put our finger in flatland and then just start talking to them through that two-dimensional part that God gave us. I kind of think that's what angels are doing. I think that what we see is just a part of the whole, and but I think it's still a body that it's connected to their whole being, but it's something that they can use to navigate the world that we live in. Now, the difference would be if I just severed that connection and, again, cut my finger off and all my essence was now just in that two-dimensional slice. Well, I'm still me, but I'm a lot less than me. I'm not a flatlander, but I'm not exactly human, at least not completely human. I'm not a complete human anymore. I would still be completely human, but not a complete human. I'm missing pieces.
Well, you would have all of your knowledge and all of your power, but it would be in a space where, it's now confined.
Wow.
Limited.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Josh, this brings me up a question I've never really thought about. How much, so I mean, if you think about this as Christ, the Son of God, giving up all these access to these dimensions to become human, how much does Christ give up to become human? How human was he?
100%. He, in my opinion, that is not like any kind of angel type situation where there's an extra dimensional body and I don't think that's. I believe that in order for Christ to fulfill everything that he came to fulfill, he had to be 100% human, just like we are. Because again, and you talked to Tim, so you know this. The enemy usurped humans' authority, so a human has to be the one to reset that, but it's also got to be God. Mm-hmm. And the whole thing is brilliant. I mean, I don't fully understand the Trinity, but and nobody does. Again, it's one of those. Right. Like, I can't see the fourth dimension. The Trinity is like infinitely higher than that, but it operates in a way that it allows it's God is able to be fully human yet still fully God. Yet he in a sense, and while the Bible says he emptied himself, so to be one of us, but he's still God, and that connection, to the Trinity is never broken. So it's a totally different situation that I can't conceptualize the Trinity really. I understand things about it just like the rest of us, but conceptualize it just like I can't conceptualize a 4-dimensional cube. So because of that, it's hard to really know the mechanics of everything that's going on there. But I really do believe absolutely that Christ was 100% human, also 100% God, but he became human so he could fulfill everything that a member of our species is supposed to fulfill in order to get our authority back, basically.
Yeah, because I mean, you think about it in the sense that he gets famished in the wilderness. You know,
yeah.
He experiences all the suffering. He experiences the lack of the depletion of what it would be like to be a human being and to travel and to walk and to have all that on your back. But also at the same time, he's able to manipulate time and space here and perform miracles and do things that we don't know how to do, and we don't understand. And it's just this interesting. I never thought about it like giving up dimensional power, like having this ability to see things. You always just kind of assumed as a kid that like Jesus, no, he retained all that, right? He came down here and it was pretty easy for him, right? No, it wasn't. It's just insane to think about what he gives up to become human being and walk among us.
Isn't it, just real quick, isn't it crazy that before he created anything, he knew that he was going to have to do that, and he didn't have to create anything. Nobody was making him. He's God, right? But he still chose to do it because he loved us that much. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the chaos of our world, it's so unpredictable. And Heiser kind of came on our show and talked about how, oftentimes, God would sort of tell his prophets what was going to happen, but humans still have the ability to make the decision. So it really creates this random element into the chaos that happens in our world, and that really gets my mind going of how God can play the chess game with us. We still get to move the pieces, but he doesn't move the pieces for us. It's just
now you're gonna get into predestination and all the
right.
Well, that's where time comes in. That's why really for us, time is a gift. Time is an absolute gift. I mean, without time, we would be under instant judgment. I mean, we wouldn't have time to learn and grow and get better and learn to grow in our faith and all of that stuff. So, I mean, that's where, in a sense, time. I mean, the way that I kind of understand this, God's everywhere all at once in all places in time. He's everywhere. He's aware of everything. I think probably to God, it's all continuous like it is for us, but it's also all one big thing. But he can interject himself into time however he wants. But he knows the choices that we're going to make. But because we are in time and we have limited knowledge, which is a gift, that gives us the ability to actually choose. Just because God knows what I'm going to do doesn't mean that I don't have any control over that. I don't know what I'm going to do. From my perspective, I could do this thing or that thing. God knows what I'm going to do, but he's not making me make that decision. So it's because I'm within time and he has, he's got a much larger perspective than I do, that I'm able to make those decisions of my own free will, yet he still knows what I'm going to do.
Don't you think interesting in this, Josh, is that like if we didn't really make decisions, we'd be these robots, and robots don't have the ability to love something because they can't choose, right? And so then there's this whole, I mean, it's a very theological conversation, but at the same time, it's like the choosing is the loving, and God gave us that ability because he loved us. It's like an Inception level mind grenade to think about all that too, right? Like,
well, you have to watch Inception. You have to watch Interstellar.
Right? It's like, well, this is the choice inside the choice inside the choice.
Field of Dreams. Right? We got a long list of movies you have to watch tonight, right? So, Josh, I mean, so maybe my line of logic here is that and we just talked about this we talked about it with Tim a little while ago, and we talked about it with Tim Mackey recently. It's just this. If Adam leaves Eden, comes down to earth, is it like the angels in Genesis 6 where they leave their estate, they can't go back? Because Adam can't go back to Eden. There's this relationship between heaven and earth, and we forfeit that. We can't go back. We lose our ability. Is Adam losing that dimensional glasses? And that's...
I used to think that, but the way that I'm thinking more now, I think Adam was perfectly human in the sense that we are just without a sin nature and without entropy and, our bodies degrading and all this stuff. But I think he was basically what humans are supposed to be, the original plan. So I don't know if God originally put that separation between dimensions or not. So it wouldn't be that, I don't think it would be that Adam would have like like an extra ability that we humans don't have. I just think that maybe the separation wasn't there. So it's not an ability for Adam. It's just, is the separation there or not? And so I think that separation is part of the curse. I mean, like I said, I think we're kind of in a quarantine type situation. So when he left Eden, he was commanded to, because he sinned. The place that he was in, he wasn't allowed. He can't have sin there. He had to leave because God created these perfect conditions for these people, and they still rebelled. So now they had to go out into the outside world. But again, God's going to restore all of that in the future. Will be restored. Now, what I wonder, we're going to be in glorified bodies that seem to have, I mean, from our perspective, extra abilities. Maybe it's just that we have less abilities. That's probably what it is. But if looking at what Christ was able to do in his glorified body is any indication of what we can do, and I don't know for sure if it is, because that's Jesus. In Jesus' earthly ministry, he can do a whole bunch of stuff I can't do. So there's probably some difference.
But he does say to his disciples, "You're going to do greater things," right? And so he does say that we will have the ability. But just really strange. Like, wait, how can we do greater things than? I don't know how theologically you interpret that, but it seems to suggest that we do have that ability. We just
yeah. So I think like when we're glorified, everything's restored. At that point it'll make sense. Sure. But right. Looking at it from this side, it seems like we're given all these extra abilities. It's probably just a restoration of what human beings were supposed to be before the curse. So that's kind of just how I'm thinking about it now, but weird to think about.
Yeah, it's complicated. So I mean, is CERN? So these angels that sin, they get locked up in the abyss, and you think CERN might play a part in their return?
It could be. Yeah, it could be. So in Abaddon Ascending, I wrote about how a scenario could play out where CERN is involved, or maybe some other particle collider, because again, they're building bigger and well, I guess better, but they're building bigger and more powerful ones in other parts of the world. So it could be one of the other ones, but or it might not be that at all. It could just be during that time, the sin of humanity is so great that it's time for the abyss to open, and maybe it has nothing to do with technology whatsoever. But I think if human beings play any role in that, it just seems like it would have to be something like a particle collider or some crazy technological thing.
I mean, do you think that the metaverse and all the digital stuff they're creating now is related to any of this? Like, are they trying to put us into some sort of dimension?
Yeah, I think what the whole metaverse thing shows is that people really want to worship themselves and be their own gods, create their own worlds, instead of live in the world that God created for us and learn how to make this the best that we can. Let's give up that and let's just start from scratch and start this brand new one. So for those not familiar, the whole idea of the metaverse is just like augmented reality. It's like a virtual world. You put some glasses on, you can see the world around you, but things are augmented, things are added, or maybe it's just a whole new environment altogether. You're still in the world, but you're seeing this other world, which is weird. It's like, is your consciousness then rooted to this made up world, or is it rooted to the real world and just experiencing? So there's all this stuff to think about. But what I think it shows is that a lot of people would rather live in a world of their own making than learn how to get by and make the most out of what God has given us. So I think it's going to depress a lot of people, like social media already has. I think it's going to increase that a lot more, because this whole self-godhood stuff, it's not fulfilling. It's like cancer. It's like having a diet of nothing but sugar. You're technically filling your stomach, but you're not, there's no nutrition there. But when you don't serve yourself and you serve God, that's like grilling up a steak. Now you're actually getting nourished. And so I think the whole metaverse idea, there's probably going to be some good applications with it. We can, thinking about evangelism, we'll be able to have an easier time connecting with people on the other side of the world, kind of in a more one-to-one scenario. But it's hard to tell right now, because I don't know exactly all of the plans of the metaverse or what they're planning to do with it or what the capabilities will be. I imagine, since it's a Facebook thing, I don't know how easy evangelism will be in that kind of world. I know basically right now on Facebook, even though there's all this censorship stuff, which I'm sure you guys have been hit with it. I've been hit with it. I can still fairly easily get a hold of somebody in Asia if I want and witness to them, through Messenger or whatever. So I don't know how much more clamped down that kind of stuff is going to be in the metaverse, but I imagine that there will be some, like the internet, there's some good things that can come out of it. We can spread the gospel a lot easier for sure, but there's a lot of bad things. I mean, pornography, just the porn industry has perpetuated so much child rape. Even in this country, America's like one of the worst countries for child sex trafficking. So with the metaverse, there's going to be even more bad stuff like that. So it's one of those things we'll have to see when we get there. I know I'm very cautious about it, and I do not plan on using it until it's really well known and I can get a sense. Just like the internet, it took me years to really start using that because, well, when I was growing up, it was like brand new, but it's because I didn't understand it. I didn't know if I posted something, is it really out there forever? So I had to take a few years to really get to know it before I could see the positive applications of it. So I assume it would be the same for the metaverse. But right now, the way that it's looking, I don't really see anything good in it. The only thing it seems to do is because we have technology where we can connect with people now, and I don't know. I mean, we are talking right now in this Zoom thing. We can see each other's faces. This is like a made up cartoon world where we would be little like emojis talking to each other. I mean, in a way, it's worse.
Yeah.
I'd rather do this. Maybe I'm
it just seems like another distraction or deception. I think you made a good point. Like the world's messaging continues to be like self-love, like love yourself and do all this stuff when the message of the Bible is to die to yourself. To die to yourself that Christ might live. And I think the further we get down to this self-idolatry, you're right, it becomes this whole space of create what you want and speak your truth. It's the abolition of absolutes, and also really the abolition of like reality in a lot of ways, right? You're kind of creating this own reality. It just feels like yet another distraction, whether it be the phones we have. And I think you made a good point though. There's like these are tools, but oftentimes I think they lopsidedly work on the evil side as opposed to the good side.
Well, it seems like they get hijacked, and I think, like you were saying earlier with CERN, like 99% of the scientists are just doing science. But it's just those people at the top, the people in the institution that have given themselves over are the ones who kind of hijack all these systems. And I didn't know if they were related. And I appreciate you being able to take like a shotgun of questions. We've been all over the place. Like,
oh yeah, no problem.
Nate, to me, it's like the World Economic Forum kind of thing, where you have this whole like top group that all the systems that are in place are meant to be for good things, to protect freedoms and protect liberties and stuff. But this stuff gets hijacked by a small percentage for the things that are nefarious. But it's all very biblical, right? We go back and we open it up and say this all makes sense. This is all supposed to happen, right? Like there shouldn't be a whole lot of surprises. Like Solomon, we say almost every episode, there's nothing new under the sun. There's no new deceptions. They just get wrapped just a little bit differently and sold to you as something that's different, and yet it's not.
Yeah.
Well, I guess one of my last questions, Josh, would be like, did they open up things like CERN back in the day? Did the creatures come out of some place? Because that's my thought. My mind just thinks imaginative. Like it's like Stranger Things. You have this. You open this hole, and these demonic creatures come out. And we hear about these crazy things that walk planet Earth back in the day. That's kind of what our show's built around. And Bigfoot seems like one of those creatures that seems to have come out of some sort of portal or something, survives the flood, and we're constantly trying to figure it out because, you go on a lot of these shows and people talk about crazy cryptid sightings, and they don't have any spiritual answers for these creatures that sound demonic. And what we're trying to unpack on the show and figure those things out is, did these angels manipulate animals? Did they come out of portals? What are some of your thoughts of the origin of some of these creatures that feel like they shouldn't be here?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot more fallen angels and demons than probably we expect. I mean, when you even really just think about the amount of people on the world, in the world, I can't get my head around a number like 7 billion, 8 billion. That's a lot. Imagine how much more other creatures, fallen angels, demons, whatever, other creatures that would want to harm humanity. And so I think there's probably a lot of that kind of stuff. I think demons can definitely take on different forms, familiar spirits, stuff like that. It seems like fallen angels can too. So I think that there's this whole spiritual satanic government over the world. It's kind of set up like ours. I think it's a governmental system. I don't think they all play nice together because they're evil. We shouldn't expect them to. Yeah. And, even Jesus said, the house will fall if one stands against another. I don't have the exact quote, but eventually this kingdom is going to fall. And that's something I've wondered about, for a while too. Do they actually all fall in line? Do they all get along? Because there are times where it seems like when we see clashes of religions and stuff, I mean, if there's a spiritual thing going on behind that, it's like one false god wants to usurp the power of another false god, and they battle, and then that somehow results in like a war on Earth, and then one of them wins. I don't know how all of that works, but it does seem like there's some actual governmental structure on the dark side that they at least loosely adhere to. So within all of that, there would be, officials, there would be leaders, but there would also be the citizens, which is probably the demons or something. And I think that there's quite a bit of those, but when we talk about fairies or Bigfoot or all these mythical creatures, I don't see any reason why, if they're not like a natural like creature that's on the earth, why couldn't a demon manifest like that? Why couldn't a fallen angel look? I mean, we see what angels look like in the Bible. They don't necessarily look human when they're in their natural form. So can they shapeshift? Can they look like other things? Could fallen ones use that power to deceive people or to mess with us? If they can, why wouldn't they? We should expect that. So, that all might fall in line, but it's a big question. Well, what do you guys think?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Bigfoot thing is what kind of roped me into the whole Genesis 6 narrative, the whole story of the Nephilim. I grew up in the church. I didn't have any concept of these things. And I didn't have any understanding of cataclysms or the weird stuff in the Bible. So in a weird way, Bigfoot kind of opened my mind to reading the Bible in the way that I think it was written, to be honest. Yeah. I think it's a book of spiritual warfare.
Yes.
Whatever way we read it now, I don't know. It's like, no, you have to get your mind into that spiritual warfare phase so you can understand what's going on. And human beings, we're so limited in the way we think about those things. But Bigfoot is just it's this gateway drug into understanding that, the world as we see it, as a modern day, just everything's physical. We don't know anything supernatural, spiritual. We can't talk about these things. It really throws a wrench into all that. And then you sort of go down that rabbit hole and good luck.
Yeah.
I don't know. Bigfoot has this physicality, but then this weird spiritual stuff too. Disappears, reappears, time slippage. People feel like they go through into some sort of like they can't move, they can't see. So many weird things are attached to it. It's not just like seeing a cougar in the woods, or a bear. It's something completely different. So well,
the good thing is it doesn't have to be completely unknown and spiritualized and like to the point that it's so abstract we can't even. I think that if I believe extra dimensions have to exist, just because again, things in time can be bent. If there's no other dimension of time, then what is it bending into? And same with space. So if there are extra dimensions and they're real, they're not physical in the sense that like the world is physical. Like, a two-dimensional creature, they would say that their world is physical. They would say ours is like super physical or something. So we could think of it like that. Theirs could be like super physical. It's not the same as ours, but there's still enough of a similarity. If extra dimensions exist, especially extra dimensions of time and space, and if these creatures exist, then it explains all of it, all the teleportation stuff, the weird time things, and why across all of these different phenomenon, whether it's Bigfoot stuff or aliens or fairies or whatever people see, it's the same symptoms. There's like lost time, time slows down, or they're in this realm that they can't see anything. And it really does sound like some of them don't just sound like an acid trip. I mean, some of them really sound like if I were to step into the fourth dimension right now, this is what it would look like. Because I can't perceive a four-dimensional object. I can only see it in three-dimensional sections. So, like, it would kind of look like an acid trip, but it wouldn't be like this mind-altering, abstract, spiritual thing. I mean, it would be physical in a sense, but you're just not able to perceive all of it. So the good thing is if extra dimensions exist, I believe they do. If these creatures exist, fallen angels, demons, and I believe they do, then it explains all of it. It explains how they're able to do this stuff. And it explains it in a way that while we don't, we can't really get our heads around, at least we can understand to a point like, okay, there's an explanation out there. That at least makes sense. And the great thing, it involves God. So even better for us.
I think my thought is it falls in that chimera kind of space of maybe some sort of half breed.
Oh yeah,
half this, half that, and I think that's the best thought I've had about it based on what we've heard.
Oh yeah, because a fallen angel, again, they're not a full angel, but they're not human either. So they would still have abilities that humans wouldn't have. Well, if one of those mates with a human, of course, the Nephilim offspring should have at least some abilities, half of what the fallen angel would have. And I think that's why we get all these stories about these mythical creatures, these gods, and they have all these powers, but somehow they still die and they're buried. Like, I think like Zeus has a grave in Crete or something. So it's like, how is that a god? That doesn't make sense.
Right.
But if the whole Nephilim thing is what's happening, it would explain why some of these people or these creatures had more powers, why they were worshipped as gods, but also why they still died.
Yeah. I mean, that we talked to Brian Forrester about that when he talks about some of these skulls that, you know, of the ancients that weren't as big as some of the original giants, supposedly, but they were anomalies, 30 or 40% bigger. So it seems like, I don't know, Luke, I don't know where you are on this, but it seems like there's this angelic DNA that started very, very concentrated, and then it slowly is just bred out of the population.
Well, yeah, it's like the Xerox thing we talked about with like why we have all the problems we have as modern day humans is that you're just a copy of 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 a copy, right? And so I think the same thing, Nate, is to continue to be diluted in characteristics of the angelic DNA. I don't know. You've got red hair. You probably got some, pal.
I think maybe. Maybe. Well, Josh, we appreciate it, man.
This has been fun.
We don't get many answers on this show. We just get more questions, but we love it.
Yeah.
No, yeah, it's great, man. It makes my head hurt because I think like sometimes we have to think about these things in ways that we can try to grasp them, right? Like, and that's the other thing. To try to describe things that exist in these crazy planes of existence in terms that we can grasp onto is also very difficult, right? It is akin to like we talk about John and Ezekiel trying to describe the things they see, and I know there's prophetic iconography that's mixed in there, but they're still trying to describe these. You level up a dimension trying to explain the things from a flatlander to a third. You have these, which I think are very practical ways to think about it. It just also is, there's more questions now. Like how,
Yeah, and isn't it cool that we're created in a way where it's fun to have those questions. Yeah. The discovery, like just the journey of discovery, is a lot of fun, and I always found that interesting that we're actually created to find that interesting. I mean, I guess some people it drives them crazy, but at least for me, I mean, that to me is so much fun and fulfilling. And it's like, if I'm created for anything, it's that. Right. But yeah, so that's really cool. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, the curiosity. I mean, that's what our whole show is. It's just trying to look at all the weird stuff in the Bible and give people kind of the keys and permission to understand the stories that their youth pastor or their pastor just wrote off. I mean, I didn't hear from Genesis 6 till I was like 36 years old. So like spent decades in the church and no one talked about this. So it's a real problem.
Josh, last thought.
Yeah.
Do you believe that this is maybe a good last thought, Nate? Do you believe that the firing up again and whatever they may be doing on sort of this macro level, especially we talk about building them in China and stuff, do you think this has to do with a quickening unto the end? Like, do you think these things are correlated? Then maybe that'd be the last thing I would want to think about.
Yeah.
That's less of a like scientific technical question and more of like they just turned it on again. Yeah, they just turned it on again. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one example of like a larger thing. I think just the explosion in technology alone is a sign that we're getting close to something. We live in a world right now, it's normal to us, but if you look at the rest of human history, it is so weird. Like, we've never lived in a time like this but yet we always had the ability to. Like, the Greeks could have had an industrial revolution. There's really no reason that they couldn't have done that, We've always had the ability to, yet for some reason in our time, all of this technology just starts exploding in like what, 100
I would say just in the last 100 years. You went from the Wright brothers to stealth bombers, and I mean in 100, which is crazy.
So I think that alone is a sign that we have got to be living in some unique time, and the next unique time to come, at least in my opinion, in the Bible, is all this prophetic stuff that we see in Revelation. And so I think that it's one small example of a larger kind of sign that we're living somewhere. But as far as a direct correlation, I think it could have something to do with that. If they are successful to opening another dimension, I believe that is the same as, somebody in the ancient past trying to communicate with a false god. I mean, how is it really different? Right. They're not seeking God. They're not seeking, well, if there are creatures out there, who made those creatures? They're just seeking what's greater than us that's accessible right now, that maybe we don't have to be held accountable to. Because with God, you got to be held accountable to him. With say aliens or these extra dimensional creatures, maybe they won't care. So I think that's kind of why the motivation to pursue those things is there in some people. But yeah, I think it could have a direct role, but at the very least, the fact that we can even do this today is amazing, and that it's increasing so fast. So yeah, I think time's short.
Well, that's kind of what I just had a thought when you were saying all that, increasing so fast, is that it seems like from the golden age was this concentrated technology was held in the arms of the angels specifically, and their offspring. And then they sort of breed it out. But it seems like now human beings' technology is increasing quickly. And if the days of Noah would be these entities return, if they could sort of hijack our tech with their tech, it would be just a recipe for Armageddon. Because in the ancient world, it sounded like the angels were the ones who really held the technology. But now, over the course of 3,000 years, humans have been able to just now our technology is increasing at a rate that we can't even keep up with. Like, guys like Elon Musk are saying AI is a problem. It's going to become a problem. Like, we've created something but it doesn't feel like angels are that's not angel tech. That's human technology. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if that.
I think probably what's happening is fallen angels might be inspiring some of these ideas.
Okay.
But ultimately humans are going to be, the vessel that decides like how it's going to manifest in our world, how it's going to work, what it's going to do, how it's going to be used. But that is kind of an interesting thought. Could it be that because time is getting short, maybe, the veil's a little thinner, and maybe now these fallen angels are actually able to inspire human beings a little more than they were able to before. So maybe that's why now we have this explosion. So, it's not so much that humans are getting smarter. I think that we've always, if anything, we're getting worse. That's just, that's just entropy. So we should expect that.
It sounds like, some of the technology they had in the days of when they built the pyramids, and it sounds like some guys say they had some sort of electricity, but they didn't have wires. They didn't need copper wires. They could send it through the universe. They could levitate stones. They didn't need to build iPhones. They had an iPhone in their head. They could just talk to you. I think that technology existed in just a completely different mechanism. It didn't need robotics and electronics.
Right. Well, if you think about it, that was a totally different world too. Magic stuff happened a lot more. You see that with Moses, and this opens a whole can of worms. But you got me on it now. So you see actual real magic things happen. And then what's really interesting, it's not explicitly said in the Bible, but when you look at church history, like for the first couple hundred years, there are actual like reports of like Apollo being channeled through this medium that actually is in presence of a Christian and he has to admit, because the Holy Spirit is present, he has to admit that he's a demon and that he doesn't really have any power, and that all these fallen angels, demons are lying to people. And that was from that oracle. Apparently that was the last words of Apollo. I wrote about it in Lost Prophecies of Qumran. Derek Gilbert's written about it too. But as you see Christianity progress, you see these magic abilities that people had diminish. And it got so bad that the solution for different leaders and stuff, they just said, well, let's just kill all the Christians then. If our magic isn't working, let's just kill all the Christians. And that didn't work. That actually just spread Christianity even further. It's like trying to beat out a fire, and the fire's just spreading all over the place. But so now it's kind of everywhere. And I think because of that, I think it's the restraining of the Holy Spirit. I think that's what it is. When that restrainer is removed, however people want to interpret that, but I think when that's removed, this whole Old Testament world where magic things are possible again, I believe that's going to come back. And I think that's why in Revelation it says they repented not of their sorceries and their witchcraft. And I think it's going to be a totally different world again where these things are actually possible. But right here in our world, because there is this restraining, I think that the agents of darkness have to use what they have access to. So they're inspiring us to build these machines that their technology, they're physical, they just work within nature. It's not exactly magic, but in this kind of world, it's the closest that they can get, and they can still use them for some of their own purposes, apparently. So I think now what's really weird to think about, we got all this technology when the restrainer is removed, if that whole theory is correct. And if all this magic stuff comes back, what is the world going to look like when we have a convergence of occult magic that all of a sudden is working really well now, and this crazy technology that we're developing today. Maybe in the future AI will be a thing. And how are those two going to live in the same world, and how are they going to both be utilized by the enemy? And I think we get some of that in Revelation. So yeah, that's an interesting thought.
Wow. I love it. It reminds me of sort of like, when David's lamenting, he's like, although I walk through the valleys of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. That there's this like, that the technology of Satan is almost this palatable chaos.
Yeah.
This darkness, and God says, but I'm going to put you in green pastures. That God's creation is the garden. The garden is absence of this technology. We don't need it. Like the technology is in photosynthesis. The technology is everything dying and then coming alive again without the need of wires, just this beauty that God will put you back in the garden, and Satan wants to put you in this technological hellhole,
Yep.
And it's just this weird, it seems like my spirit longs to be in the garden. It does not long for the metaverse and all this crazy stuff that they're coming.
Sound like C.S. Lewis, dude.
Yeah. The fires of Mordor versus the Shire, right?
No, if your spirit longs for something that's not here, you were meant for another place, right? And that's a very bad paraphrase of that quote, but he's essentially saying that this is, we're aliens in this place, essentially.
Yeah,
and that's wild. It's wild to think about, like the explosion of technology is really like the fabrication or the counterfeiting of creation, and I think that's an interesting point, Josh. The idea that they would do that because of the restraint of the Holy Spirit. I mean, because God didn't pour out His Holy Spirit until the day of Pentecost. Right, so you had sort of this whole free reign for all that time, where there wasn't this constraining power that lived in Christians or those that follow God. There was the manifest presence of God in like the Ark of the Covenant, and when God showed up and did things, to set things right again.
Right. But that was always localized.
Very localized. But to say, that happened, in Israel, in these places where God needed to be to essentially stamp out and protect His people. And then Christ did what He did and undid all that stuff. We've talked through a bunch of this with Heiser and and a bunch of our guests on what Christ did in undoing things. But in doing that, He did. It's just fascinating to think about how then our idea conceptually of technology then completely changed at some point after the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, or the pouring out of God's Spirit into His people. And then you have this. It is like a metaverse. There's this whole separate thing that begins to take place as man.
Yeah.
I mean, for all intents and purposes, man sort of is we are kind of building this Tower of Babel again, right? This whole technological thing that will eventually war with God, whether we know that or not. At this point, we are building that. Anyway, that's a whole that'll make my mind hurt too. So.
Yeah, well, I love it. I love how the spread of the Holy Spirit is like putting out the fires. And Doug Van Dorn talked a little about that on our show. As Christians proliferate, it sort of pushes back the darkness, and that's probably why that sort of demonic technology or the occultic world that the ancients lived in it looks so different than our world now.
Yeah,
to the point where people don't even believe it happened.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're like, no, it did happen. But the book is Abaddon Ascending. Where else could people get a hold of you and interact with you, Josh?
skywatchtv.com. That people can find me there. My personal kind of website is dailyrenegade.com. It's kind of a central hub of a couple shows I do and some shows that some other people do. And we have like 4 or 5 different hosts, so people will be able to find a show they like on there. But that's dailyrenegade.com. We're actually trying to use that to fight back against this censorship stuff. For the first part of my ministry, I always just kind of relied on YouTube, because for a while YouTube was great. You could just post anything and nobody cared, and you could actually grow an audience.
Right.
And then a few years ago they started getting into the censorship stuff, and they actually deleted my entire channel, and I lost 8 years worth of stuff that I didn't have backed up, because at the time I didn't even when that first happened, I had no indication that was coming. Yeah. So since then, we've been backing everything up on dailyrenegade.com, and we, let's do something kind of like what the Daily Wire does, but let's do it for like fringe Christian stuff. I think that'd be fun. And so we have that available, dailyrenegade.com. But the big one is Skywatch TV. That's where if people want to find like my products or books or movies or anything like that, you can just go to skywatchtvstore.com and put my name in the search engine and you'll find it.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, give Derek a big hug from us. And we love it, man. Thanks for coming on our show, talking about CERN, and just like I said earlier, taking a shotgun blast of all kinds of weird questions.
Oh, anytime. Yeah, it's fun. I enjoy the conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, blurry creatures. I mean, that's why we call it blurry, because it's just everything's just weird and out of focus. You can't tell what you're talking about half the time. So
exactly,
appreciate it, Josh. Thanks so much.
Yeah,
Thanks,
anytime.
Josh.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.